Hello everyone, my name is Dita O'Boyle and we are going to be talking about bony fish, our swimming friends, facts, and myths. I work at Rookery Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. So first of all, why am I being specific and saying we're only going to be talking about bony fish? Well, that's because we are not going to be discussing sharks. That is a different group of fish that will be covered at a different time. So what are the major characteristics of a bony fish? What makes them different from a mammal or a reptile? Well, first one is, as you can see in this background, fish have scales, these lovely kind of hard parts that help protect their body. They have bones like we do, made out of calcium, where sharks have bones made out of cartilage, so very different structure. They have gills to get oxygen out of the water, and where we, mammals, would have lungs to breathe air. And then they do have paired fins. Now, Rookery Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve starts south of downtown Naples, goes around Marco Island and into the 10,000 Islands. And in that yellow area, we have a lot of marine areas, estuarine, which is where salt and freshwater mix, and freshwater habitats. And among all of those, we actually have around 250 species of fresh and marine fish living there. So your first fact or myth is all fish have bony scales. Now the key word with this one is that I said all. So while scales are considered a defining characteristic of the group of fish, that's not always the case. Not all fish have scales. You can see in this picture of a tarpon, it has really big, distinctive scales. But there are quite a few species that don't have any scales. They're perfectly fine with a soft skin and a layer of slime to keep themselves safe. When it comes to scales, you can break them into two major groups in bony fish. So we have our gameroid scales in this picture, and this is a flortigar, and these scales are not overlapping, and they actually have a layer of bone inside them. So it's like really, really heavy metal armor. Very strong, not very flexible. Then we have scales that are more flexible, don't have that layer of bone, and they overlap. So they're lighter, more flexible, and this can be further broken into two different groups. Phycoid scales have a smooth edge, and ctenoid have a rough edge. Do you think bony fish are bad parents when you compare them to other groups of animals? Generally speaking, yes. They're going to put less investment into their care of their eggs than, say, a bird would or even a mouse. In this picture, there's a whole bunch of NASA groupers spawning, and a lot of times they're going to be broadcast spawners. So they release their eggs out into the ocean. They start off as plankton drifting around, and they just hope some of them survive. But they're releasing thousands and thousands of eggs. So there's a pretty good chance that some of them are going to survive. Other fish actually do a little bit of parental investment. Not the same as keeping your kids home and watching them until they're 18, but it's a lot of investment for a fish. Seahorses, in the males, they actually have a special pouch on their stomach, and they will incubate the eggs in there. And so then when the eggs hatch, they come out fully formed as little fish. So there's less chance that someone's going to eat that defenseless egg, like with the NASA grouper. We have this odd looking fish here in our area as well. This is called a spot-fin jawfish. And the jawfish, and actually the catfish too, have a different way of preventing their eggs from getting eaten. They will actually keep the eggs in their mouth. They're considered mouth brooders, and then they spit them out when it's time for the eggs to hatch. So this is not a species of jawfish we have here, but you can get the idea of how many eggs they keep in their mouth. And when those eggs are in the mouth, that parent can't eat or anything because it's too full of eggs. So do we think fish only have 5 senses, or do they have less senses? Let's talk about humans for a second. So we have 5 senses. We have sight, touch, hearing, smell, and taste. With fish, they have the same. They have sight like we do, depending on the fish, but their vision is going to be very different. And that's just because they're living underwater. And depending on how deep you go in the water, how well you can see different colors changes, because as that light penetrates deeper, you can't see the warmer colors, the red, the orange, quite as well. And so a lot of the deep sea animals will primarily have their vision in the blue area. And actually, if animals are red, they're almost invisible. Touch, smell, and taste are kind of very heavily connected. And with fish, this is even more drastic than with humans, because they will have sometimes extra sensors like these barbels on this catfish, and they'll be covered in taste buds. And so it'll increase their sense of touch because they can feel around for things, but also, again, they have taste buds on them. So that is all connected, those three. Now this one we don't have as humans. This is called a lateral line, and you can see in this top fish, this is a snook, this nice dark black line on him, which is a pretty big characteristic if you're trying to catch a snook, runs along a fish's lateral line. And this area has a series of pressure sensors. They can tell if something's moving towards them in the water. So this is a great way to avoid predators, or maybe kind of feel if your prey is coming towards you. All fish have a lateral line. It's not necessarily very clear. If you look at the bottom at this pompano, this lateral line is right there now that you can see it, that I've drawn over it. When it comes to hearing, fish have ear bones just like we do, but with them, they're called otoliths, and they do the same function. They help them with balance and hearing. And a really cool thing about otoliths is, depending on the species, as you can see in these pictures, they're going to be different shapes, and you can actually age certain species of fish by looking at their otoliths. You can cut the otolith carefully in half, and there's going to be a series of rings, and you can count those. And depending on the fish again, you might be able to count it to the day or just to the year. Do we think fish only communicate with visual cues? Well, maybe some of you have a pet betta, and they definitely use visual cues, right? They flare up their gill covers and they face off with their reflection, or maybe with another betta. And those visual cues are really important because there isn't a vet in the ocean running around patching up fish after they get into a fight. So trying to do those displays to figure out who's boss or who's in charge is a good way to avoid injury. It could also not just be behavior, it could be their coloration changes. It could be indicating if you're less dominant or if you're shy. So they can also adjust their color in some species to talk to each other. Now, fish do communicate with visual cues, but they also communicate with sound. This is a picture of a Gulf toadfish, and this little drawing diagram is showing a part of a fish's body called a swim bladder. I'm going to play a sound for you real quick, and this is a toadfish. Sounds kind of funny, doesn't it? So toadfish make that sound by squeezing muscles around their swim bladder, and it makes that sound. And that sound is really important because that's how they're going to communicate with a potential mate. Now there is a variety of ways fish can make sound. This one is a popular sport fish here. This is a black drum, and they can get up to almost 100 pounds, so they do get quite large. And their method of making sound is different. They're not using muscles. Instead, they're going to be using a special set of teeth in their jaw called their pharyngeal jaw. You can see in this picture with its mouth open, those yellow flat-looking crushers. And when those scrape together, that sound is going to bounce off their swim bladder, and it resonates and makes that drumming sound that you heard in the video. A lot of different fish do this as well. With black drum in particular, though, when they are breeding in large congregations, you can hear the sound outside of the water. And fish do need our help, even though they're not warm and cuddly like a puppy or a cat, but they are suffering from habitat loss. And in our area, that can be, or in north of here, could be seagrass beds. When boats go into areas where there's a lot of seagrass and the water's really shallow, they can leave these track marks, and that interferes with the growth of seagrass. And seagrass is a really good habitat for a lot of fish. So avoiding shallow areas with seagrass is a huge help. And then overfishing of some species, because since they do live in the ocean, there's a lot of times where we may not know how many there are in the ocean or all of their life history. We may not know where they breed, how many babies they have. It's really, really useful to and helpful to follow fishing regulations. And in Florida, we're pretty lucky because we have a pretty awesome fisheries management system. So our fish are doing pretty good down here. So if you are going to go fishing, definitely get your saltwater fishing or your freshwater fishing license. Find one of these guides so you know who you're catching. And lastly, there are invasive species. Now this is more of an issue in freshwater, and they're coming from the aquarium trade, such as this Oscar. This is a walking catfish, but we do have marine species as well, primarily the lionfish. So if you do have a pet fish and it's getting too large for your aquarium, or maybe you can't take care of it anymore, please don't release it in your backyard. You can either dispose of it properly or maybe rehome it to a friend. Thank you so much for listening in about fish.